bound by courage. Lady Catherine of Dunmere had once believed Sir Tristan de Clare was the most honorable of knights until she saw him standing beside her father's murderer. Now, as he caught her by the waist in the moonlit corridor, his voice was raw. "You think I betrayed you," he murmured. "But tell me, my lady, do you even know what betrayal is?" Chapter 1. The Whispers of Treachery. The chill of the stone floor seeped through Lady Catherine of Dunmere's thin slippers, a stark reminder of the coldness that had settled in her heart. It had been 3 moons since the Battle of Oakhaven, 3 moons since she had last seen her father, Lord Edmund, ride out, banner held high, a beacon of strength and unwavering loyalty, to King Alaric. He had never returned. Instead, a blood-stained messenger, his face ashen and voice trembling, had delivered the news Lord Edmund, felled not by an enemy's blade in the heat of battle, but by treachery, struck down from behind. And the name whispered in the same breath, the name that had become a poisoned barb in Catherine's soul, was Sir Tristan de Clare. Catherine pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the oriel window, the intricate leaded panes distorting the view of the courtyard below. The early morning mist clung to the stones, blurring the edges of the familiar landscape, mirroring the uncertainty that now clouded her every thought. Sir Tristan, her father's most trusted knight, the man Catherine had secretly admired from afar, the man whose quiet strength and unwavering gaze had once made her heart flutter, he was now branded a traitor, an oath-breaker. The image seared itself into her memory. The hastily convened court, the king's grim face, the accusing whispers that rippled through the assembled nobles. And then him, Sir Tristan, standing tall and unyielding, not beside the king as he should have been, but beside Lord Beaumont, the man who had claimed her father's lands and title, the man whose ambition had always been a festering wound in the side of the kingdom. Tristan's face had been unreadable, a mask of stoic indifference that had chilled Catherine more than any overt display of guilt. She had watched, numb with disbelief, as Tristan had knelt before Beaumont, swearing fealty. The words, spoken in his deep, resonant voice, had been like daggers to her heart. Each syllable, a testament to his betrayal, a betrayal not only of her father, but of everything Catherine had believed in. Honor, loyalty, the sacred oaths that bound knight to lord, all shattered, all meaningless. A soft knock on the chambered door startled her. "My lady?" It was Alara, her handmaiden, her face etched with concern. Alara had been with Catherine since childhood, a constant presence, a comforting warmth in the often cold formality of Dunmere Castle. Catherine straightened, smoothing the wrinkles from her dark blue gown.
"Come in, Alara."
Alara entered, carrying a tray laden with a simple breakfast of bread, cheese, and a small flagon of warmed wine. "You haven't touched your supper, my lady," she said gently, placing the tray on a small table near the hearth. "You must eat." Catherine shook her head. "I have no appetite." The thought of food turned her stomach. Grief, a heavy, suffocating cloak, had settled upon her, stealing her hunger, her sleep, her very will to live. Alara's eyes, usually bright with laughter, were filled with a deep, abiding sadness. "Lord Edmund would not want you to waste away, my lady. He was so proud of your strength." The mention of her father's name brought a fresh wave of pain, a sharp, agonizing pang that constricted her chest. "Strength?" Catherine's voice was a hoarse whisper. "What strength do I have left, Alara? My father is dead, betrayed by the man he trusted most. And I did nothing." Alara knelt beside her, taking Catherine's cold hands in her own. "You were not there, my lady. There was nothing you could have done." "But I should have seen it," Catherine insisted, her voice thick with self-reproach. "I should have known." There were whispers, rumors of Tristan's discontent, of his growing closeness to Beaumont. I dismissed them, blinded by foolish admiration. Alara squeezed her hands gently. "Do not blame yourself, my lady. Sir Tristan was a master of deception, it seems. He fooled us all." Catherine pulled her hands away, rising to pace restlessly before the hearth. The fire, newly lit, crackled and spat, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. "He was so honorable, she murmured, the words a bitter irony on her tongue. Or so I thought. He swore oaths, Alara. Sacred oaths of fealty, of protection. How could he break them so easily? Some men are driven by ambition, my lady, Alara said softly. By greed, by the lure of power. Lord Beaumont is a powerful man, and he offers much to those who serve him. But Tristan was not like that, Catherine protested, though even as she spoke the words, doubt gnawed at her. Had she ever truly known him? Had she been so blinded by her own feelings that she had failed to see the darkness that lurked beneath the surface? The memory of a stolen moment, a brief encounter in the castle gardens months before the battle, flashed through her mind. Tristan had found her there, tending to the roses, her father's favorite flower. He had stopped, his dark eyes softening as he watched her. You have a gentle touch, my lady, he had said, his voice low and intimate. Like your father. Catherine had blushed, flustered by his attention. My father says I have a stubborn streak, she had replied, trying to deflect his gaze. Tristan had smiled then, a rare, genuine smile that had lit up his face and made her heart skip a beat. Perhaps he had conceded. But stubbornness can be a virtue, my lady, especially in these troubled times. He had reached out then, his fingers brushing hers as he gently took a rose from her hand. A rose for a rose, he had murmured, his eyes holding hers captive. And then, he had tucked the flower behind her ear, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary. The memory, once a source of secret joy, now felt like a cruel mockery. Had that moment, too, been a lie? Had his words, his touch, been part of his elaborate deception? A sudden, sharp rap on the door interrupted her thoughts. Lady Catherine? It was Sir Gareth, the captain of the guard, his voice gruff and urgent. Lord Beaumont requests your presence in the great hall. Catherine's heart clenched. Beaumont, the man who had stolen her father's life, his lands, his title. The man who now held her, a virtual prisoner, within the walls of her own home. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the encounter. She would not show him fear. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Tell Lord Beaumont I will attend him shortly, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Gareth bowed. As you wish, my lady. As the door closed behind him, Catherine turned back to Alara. Help me dress, she said, her voice firm with resolve. I will face him, and I will find out the truth, no matter the cost. She would meet Beaumont's eyes, and within them, search for any flicker of confirmation, any hint of the conspiracy that had cost her everything. And Tristan, she would find a way to confront him, too.
She needed to understand.
She needed to know why. Chapter 2. A Knight's Shadowed Oath. The great hall of Dunmere Castle, once a place of warmth and laughter, now felt cold and alien. The familiar tapestries depicting the heroic deeds of Catherine's ancestors seemed to mock her, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the grayness that had enveloped her world. Lord Beaumont sat at the high table, his broad frame dominating the space, his presence a constant, suffocating reminder of her loss. He was a man of imposing stature, with a thick beard streaked with gray and eyes that glittered with cold ambition. Catherine approached him slowly, her head held high, her steps measured. She wore a gown of deep crimson, the color of defiance, a stark contrast to the morning black she had worn for the past 3 moons. Alara walked a respectful distance behind, her presence a small comfort in the vast, echoing hall. Beaumont watched her approach, a smirk playing on his lips. Lady Catherine, he said, his voice booming across the hall. You honor us with your presence. Catherine stopped before the table, her gaze unwavering. Lord Beaumont, she replied, her voice cool and steady. You requested my presence. He gestured to a chair placed at the opposite end of the table, a deliberate positioning that emphasized the distance between them, the chasm that now separated the rightful heir of Dunmere from its usurper.
Please be seated.
Catherine remained standing. I prefer to stand. Beaumont's smirk widened. As you wish. I trust you are finding your accommodations comfortable? The question was a thinly veiled threat, a reminder of her precarious position. She was a guest in her own home, a prisoner in all but name. The accommodations are adequate, she replied, her voice devoid of emotion. Adequate? Beaumont raised an eyebrow. I had hoped for more enthusiasm. After all, I have gone to great lengths to ensure your well-being. Catherine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. My well-being was not your concern when you murdered my father. The words hung in the air, sharp and accusing. The few servants and guards present in the hall shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Catherine and Beaumont. Beaumont's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. You tread on dangerous ground, Lady Catherine. Accusations of treason are not to be made lightly. Treason? Catherine's voice dripped with scorn. Is that not what you committed, Lord Beaumont? You and your accomplice. She deliberately avoided saying Tristan's name, the sound of it too painful to utter. Beaumont leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. Your father died in battle, Lady Catherine. A tragic loss, but a soldier's death. He was struck down from behind, Catherine retorted. By a coward's blade. A blade wielded by someone he trusted. You have no proof of that, Beaumont snapped. I have the word of a dying man, Catherine countered. A man who witnessed the treachery firsthand. Beaumont scoffed. The ravings of a mortally wounded soldier? Hardly reliable testimony. He named Sir Tristan, Catherine said, the name finally escaping her lips, a bitter taste on her tongue. He saw him standing beside you, Lord Beaumont, smiling as my father fell. Beaumont's face darkened with rage. Sir Tristan is a loyal knight, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He would never betray his lord. He betrayed my father, Catherine insisted. He betrayed his oath. Enough. Beaumont slammed his fist on the table, making the goblets and platters rattle. I will not tolerate these accusations any longer. Sir Tristan is a valued member of my household. He has proven his loyalty to me time and again. Catherine met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and hatred. Then where is he? She asked. Why is he not here to defend himself? Beaumont hesitated for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Sir Tristan is away on a mission, he said finally. A delicate matter that requires his discretion. A mission? Catherine raised an eyebrow. Or is he hiding from the truth? Beaumont rose from his chair, his towering figure looming over her. You will hold your tongue, Lady Catherine, he said, his voice low and menacing. Or you will regret it. Catherine did not flinch. I will not be silenced, Lord Beaumont. I will not rest until I have uncovered the truth about my father's death. And I will see justice done, even if it means bringing down your entire house of cards. Beaumont stared at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and something else. Was it fear? Catherine couldn't be sure. Finally, he spoke, his voice regaining its composure. You are a foolish girl, Lady Catherine. You play a dangerous game. I have nothing left to lose, Catherine replied, her voice unwavering. Beaumont turned away, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. Go back to your chambers, Lady Catherine, and consider your position carefully. Your future depends on it. Catherine turned and walked away, her head held high, her back straight. She would not be intimidated. She would not be broken. She would find the truth, no matter the cost. As she walked, she vowed to discover the real meaning behind Tristan's oath, the one he gave her father and the one he now gave to the man who had taken everything from her. She would find him and force the truth to see the light of the day, no matter how shadowed it had become. The weight of his betrayal pressed down, and she knew in the cold corridor's silence that it would become her driving force. Chapter 3. The Serpent's Embrace. The days that followed were a suffocating blend of strained courtesy and simmering tension. Catherine moved through the castle like a ghost, haunting the halls and chambers that had once been filled with her family's laughter and love. She avoided Beaumont as much as possible, taking her meals in her chambers, spending her days in the library, poring over old scrolls and histories, searching for any clue, any hint of the conspiracy that had led to her father's death. The library, a vast, circular room lined with shelves that reached to the vaulted ceiling, had always been her sanctuary. The scent of old parchment and leather, the quiet rustle of turning pages, had always soothed her soul. But now, even this familiar refuge offered little comfort. The weight of her grief, the burden of her suspicions, pressed down on her, making it difficult to concentrate. One afternoon, as she sat at a large oak table, a faded map of the kingdom spread before her, she heard a soft sound behind her. She turned, expecting to see Alara, but instead, she found herself face to face with Lady Isolde, Beaumont's wife. Isolde was a woman of striking beauty, with raven black hair, piercing blue eyes, and a regal bearing that commanded attention. She was also known for her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, a woman who was not afraid to speak her mind, even to her powerful husband. Catherine had always found her both intriguing and intimidating. Lady Catherine, Isolde said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "May I join you?" Catherine hesitated, unsure of Isolde's motives. She had had little interaction with Beaumont's wife since his arrival, and she had sensed a certain coldness, a veiled hostility, in the other woman's gaze. "Of course, Lady Isolde," Catherine replied, gesturing to a chair opposite her. Isolde sat down, her silk gown rustling softly. She studied Catherine for a moment, her blue eyes searching and assessing. "You are troubled, Lady Catherine," she said finally. "I can see it in your eyes." Catherine looked away, uncomfortable under Isolde's scrutiny. "I have reason to be troubled," she said quietly. Isolde nodded. "Indeed. The death of your father was a tragedy. A great loss for the kingdom." Catherine's gaze snapped back to Isolde's. "You believe it was a tragedy?" she asked, her voice edged with suspicion. Isolde met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "What else would I believe?" "Some might call it murder," Catherine said, her voice low and intense. Isolde did not flinch. "Murder is a strong word, Lady Catherine. Do you have proof to support such an accusation?" "I have the word of a dying man," Catherine replied, "and the suspicious circumstances surrounding my father's death." Isolde leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Circumstances can be deceiving, Lady Catherine. Things are not always what they seem." Catherine's heart quickened. Was Isolde offering her an alliance? Or was this a trap? "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. Isolde's gaze flickered towards the door, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "My husband is a powerful man, Lady Catherine. But he is also a dangerous man. He has made many enemies." "And Sir Tristan?" Catherine asked, the name a barely audible whisper. "Where does he fit into all of this?" Isolde's expression hardened. "Sir Tristan is a complicated man," she said carefully. "He has his own loyalties, his own secrets." "Loyalties to whom?" Catherine pressed. "To my father? Or to Beaumont?" Isolde hesitated, her eyes darting around the room again. "I cannot say more, Lady Catherine. It is not safe." "Not safe?" Catherine's voice rose in frustration. "My father is dead, Lady Isolde. What could be less safe than that?" Isolde placed a calming hand on Catherine's arm. "Patience, Lady Catherine. You must be careful. You are surrounded by enemies." "And you?" Catherine asked, searching Isolde's face for any sign of deception. "Are you my enemy, Lady Isolde?" Isolde's gaze held hers, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "I am no one's enemy, Lady Catherine," she said softly. "But I am also no one's fool. I know how to survive in this world, and I suggest you learn to do the same." She rose from her chair, her movements graceful and deliberate. "I have said too much already," she said. "But I will leave you with this. Trust no one, Lady Catherine, not even those who seem to offer you friendship." And with that, she swept out of the library, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts, her suspicions, and a growing sense of unease. Isolde's words, like a serpent's embrace, were both alluring and terrifying. Was she a friend, offering veiled warnings? Or a foe, playing a subtle game of manipulation? Catherine knew she had to tread carefully, for in the court of Lord Beaumont, every smile could hide a dagger, and every whispered word could be a betrayal. The truth, it seemed, was a dangerous prize, and she was surrounded by those who would protect it at any cost. Chapter 4. Echoes in the Stone Hall. The evening air was thick with the scent of wood smoke and roasting meat as Catherine made her way to the great hall for supper. She had avoided dining with Beaumont since their confrontation, preferring the solitude of her chambers. But tonight, she felt a restless energy, a need to be among others, even if those others were her enemies. She needed to observe, to listen, to glean any scrap of information that might shed light on her father's death. As she entered the hall, she saw that it was less crowded than usual. Beaumont was seated at the high table, as always, but Isolde was absent. A few of Beaumont's men-at-arms were scattered around the room, their faces grim and watchful. The atmosphere was tense, subdued, as if a storm were brewing. Catherine took a seat at a smaller table near the back of the hall, trying to make herself as inconspicuous as possible. Alara sat beside her, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "It feels different tonight," Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire. Catherine nodded. "Something is amiss. I can feel it." They ate in silence, picking at the food on their plates. Catherine's gaze kept drifting towards Beaumont. He was engaged in a hushed conversation with one of his lieutenants, a man named Sir Kelric, known for his ruthlessness and unwavering loyalty to his lord. Catherine strained to hear their words, but they were speaking too softly. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the entrance to the hall. A group of guards dragged in a young man, his clothes torn and dirty, his face bruised and bloodied. He was clearly a prisoner, and he struggled against his captors, his eyes wild with fear. Beaumont rose from his chair, his face a mask of cold fury. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Sir Kelric stepped forward. "My lord," he said, "we found this man lurking near the stables. He claims to be a messenger from Lord Eldred." Lord Eldred was a powerful nobleman whose lands bordered Dunmere. He had been a long-time rival of Catherine's father, and there had been rumors of open conflict between them for years. Beaumont's eyes narrowed. A messenger? Or a spy? The young man, despite his fear, met Beaumont's gaze with defiance. "I am a messenger, my lord," he said, his voice trembling. "I carry a message for Lady Catherine of Dunmere." Catherine's heart leaped into her throat. A message for her? From Lord Eldred? What could this mean? Beaumont turned his gaze towards Catherine, his eyes burning with suspicion. "You know this man, Lady Catherine?" Catherine shook her head. "I have never seen him before in my life." Beaumont smirked. "Perhaps he is mistaken. Or perhaps he is lying." He turned back to the messenger. "What is this message you claim to carry?" The young man hesitated, his eyes darting towards Catherine. "It is a private message, my lord. I am instructed to deliver it only to Lady Catherine herself." Beaumont laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "You expect me to believe that? You are in my hall, surrounded by my men. You will speak the message now, or you will face the consequences." The messenger's face paled, but he stood his ground. "I cannot, my lord. I have sworn an oath." Beaumont's patience snapped. "Seize him," he roared. "Take him to the dungeons. We will see how long his oath holds under torture." Catherine rose from her chair, her voice ringing out across the hall. "No." Beaumont turned to her, his eyes blazing with anger. "You dare to interfere, Lady Catherine?" "He is a messenger," Catherine said, her voice trembling but firm. "He has a right to deliver his message. You cannot torture him simply because you suspect him of treachery." Beaumont's face was a mask of rage. "You forget yourself, Lady Catherine. You are in my power. I will do as I please. He is under my protection, as he arrived at my home with word for me," Catherine stated, stepping forward and drawing the stares of everyone present and daring anyone to defy her, even Beaumont. Beaumont and Catherine stared intensely at each other, in a battle of will and might. "Very well," Beaumont said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Let him speak. But if he lies, if he attempts to deceive me, he will suffer the consequences. And so will you, Lady Catherine." He gestured to the guards to release the messenger. The young man, trembling with relief, stumbled towards Catherine. He reached into his tunic and pulled out a small, sealed scroll. For you, my lady, he said, his voice barely a whisper. From Lord Eldred. Catherine took the scroll, her hands shaking. She broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The message was short, written in a hurried scrawl. Lady Catherine, I know the truth about your father's death. Meet me at the old oak tree by the Whispering Falls, 3 nights hence at moonrise.
Come alone.
Trust no one. Eldred. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest. Eldred knew the truth? Could this be the breakthrough she had been waiting for? Or was it another trap, another layer of deception in this deadly game? As she looked up at the messenger, he gave her a subtle nod, before fixing his gaze on the floor, awaiting Beaumont's command. The echoes in the stone hall seemed to amplify the weight of the message, the danger it represented, and the potential hope it offered. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that her next steps could lead her to salvation or to her doom. Chapter 5. The Falcon's Flight. The 2 days that followed were an agonizing test of Catherine's patience. She kept the message from Lord Eldred a closely guarded secret, sharing it only with Alara, whose loyalty she trusted implicitly. The thought of meeting Eldred, of finally uncovering the truth about her father's death, filled her with both excitement and dread. She knew the risks were immense. Beaumont's spies were everywhere, and if he discovered her plan, the consequences would be dire. She spent her time preparing, meticulously planning every detail of her escape. She chose a dark, hooded cloak to conceal her identity and a sturdy pair of riding boots for the journey. She also secured a small dagger, which she concealed beneath her cloak, a necessary precaution in these dangerous times. Alara, ever resourceful, managed to procure a map of the surrounding forest, marking the location of the Whispering Falls, a secluded spot several miles from the castle. On the 3rd night, as the moon began its ascent, casting a silvery glow over the landscape, Catherine slipped out of her chambers, her heart pounding in her chest. Alara, her face pale with worry, stood at the door, clutching a small pouch containing food and water. Be careful, my lady, Alara whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Please be careful. Catherine embraced her handmaiden, her own eyes filling with tears. I will, she promised. And I will return. I swear it. She slipped out into the corridor, her footsteps silent on the stone floor. The castle was quiet, most of its inhabitants asleep. She made her way to the stables, her senses on high alert, listening for any sign of pursuit. She had chosen Falcon, her father's favorite horse, a magnificent black stallion known for his speed and stamina. Falcon greeted her with a soft whinny, nuzzling her hand as she approached. She saddled him quickly, her movements practiced and efficient. As she led Falcon out of the stables, she saw a figure lurking in the shadows. Her heart leaped into her throat, but then she recognized him. Gareth, the captain of the guard, the man who had delivered Beaumont's summons to her what felt like a lifetime ago. Gareth stepped forward, his face grim. My lady, he said, his voice low and urgent. Where are you going? Catherine hesitated, unsure whether to trust him. She had always sensed a certain decency in Gareth, a reluctance to fully embrace Beaumont's cruelty. But she couldn't be sure. I am going for a ride, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I need some air. Gareth's gaze swept over her, taking in her dark cloak, her riding boots, the determined set of her jaw. At this hour? He asked, his voice skeptical. Alone? Catherine met his gaze, her eyes pleading for understanding. Please, Gareth, she said softly. Do not betray me. Gareth studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, a heavy, weary sound. I served your father, Lady Catherine, he said quietly. I served him loyally for many years. I saw what happened at Oakhaven. I saw things that troubled me deeply. Catherine's heart quickened. Was he offering his help? Go, Gareth said, his voice firm. Go quickly. And may the gods protect you. He stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Catherine mounted Falcon, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and trepidation. She urged the stallion forward, galloping out of the castle gates and into the darkness of the forest. The ride was long and arduous, the forest path treacherous and uneven. The moon, partially obscured by clouds, cast eerie shadows that danced among the trees, making it difficult to see. But Catherine pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to reach the Whispering Falls and uncover the truth. As she neared her destination, she heard the sound of rushing water, the roar of the falls growing louder with each passing moment. She slowed Falcon to a walk, dismounting near a copse of trees, her eyes searching the shadows for any sign of Lord Eldred. The falls were a breathtaking sight, a cascade of white water plunging down a sheer cliff face into a swirling pool below. The mist from the falls created a shimmering veil that hung in the air, giving the place an ethereal, almost magical quality. Catherine waited, her hand resting on the hilt of her dagger, her senses on high alert. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. She began to fear that Eldred had changed his mind, that he had been discovered, that this was all a cruel hoax. Then, she heard a sound, a twig snapping beneath a foot. She whirled around, her dagger drawn, her heart pounding in her chest. A figure emerged from the shadows, his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. "Lady Catherine?" A voice asked, a voice she recognized, a voice that sent a shiver of both anticipation and dread down her spine. It was Lord Eldred. He approached, and with a flick of the wrist, lowered the hood obscuring him, his face etched by the moonlight that now peeked through the clouds. The falcon had flown, and the meeting, fraught with peril, had finally begun. Chapter 6. Beneath a Cloak of Stars. Lord Eldred was an older man, his face weathered and lined, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of battles fought and hardships endured. He was shorter than Catherine had expected, but his presence was commanding, his gaze sharp and unwavering. He looked around cautiously, ensuring they were truly alone, before beckoning Catherine closer to the roaring falls, the sound of which would mask their conversation. "Lady Catherine," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I am glad you came." Catherine sheathed her dagger, but her hand remained close to its hilt. "You said you knew the truth about my father's death," she said, her voice barely audible above the roar of the falls.
Tell me.
Eldred nodded. "I do. But first, you must understand, I am risking my life by being here. Beaumont has spies everywhere. If he discovers our meeting, he left the thread unspoken." "I understand the risks," Catherine said, her voice firm. "But I need to know the truth. My father deserved better than to be murdered by traitors." Eldred studied her for a moment, his eyes assessing her resolve. "Your father was a good man, Lady Catherine," he said finally. "A brave and honorable man. He did not deserve to die the way he did." "Then tell me what happened," Catherine pleaded. "Tell me who killed him." Eldred took a deep breath. "It was not Sir Tristan who struck the killing blow," he said, his voice heavy with regret. Catherine's heart leaped with a mixture of relief and confusion. "Not Tristan?" she repeated. "But I saw him." Standing beside Beaumont, Eldred shook his head. "You saw what Beaumont wanted you to see. It was a carefully orchestrated deception, a play designed to break your spirit and secure your compliance."
"But why?"
Catherine asked, her mind reeling. "Why would Beaumont frame Tristan?" "Because Tristan knew the truth," Eldred replied. "He knew that Beaumont was planning to betray your father, to join forces with the northern rebels. He tried to warn your father, but it was too late." Catherine struggled to comprehend his words. "Tristan tried to warn him?" she whispered. "But he swore fealty to Beaumont." "He did," Eldred confirmed. "But only to protect you." Catherine's eyes widened in disbelief. "Protect me?" Eldred nodded. "Tristan knew that if he openly defied Beaumont, you would be in grave danger. Beaumont would have used you as a pawn, a hostage to ensure Tristan's silence.
So, Tristan made a choice.
He pretended to betray your father, to join Beaumont's side, in order to gain his trust and protect you from his wrath." Catherine's mind was spinning. This was too much to take in. Tristan, the man she had believed to be a traitor, was actually her protector? "He has been working from within," Eldred continued, gathering evidence of Beaumont's treachery, waiting for the right moment to strike. He is playing a dangerous game, Lady Catherine. A game that could cost him his life. Tears welled up in Catherine's eyes, tears of relief, of confusion, of a love she had thought lost forever. But why didn't he tell me? She whispered. Why did he let me believe he was a traitor? Eldred sighed. He couldn't risk it, Lady Catherine. He couldn't be sure who to trust. He knew Beaumont was watching you, waiting for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to exploit your grief. But the messenger, the one who said he saw Tristan, he was paid by Beaumont, Eldred said.
To spread lies, to sow discord.
All a game to keep anyone from discovering the true mastermind. Catherine's legs felt weak. She leaned against a nearby tree, struggling to regain her composure. I need to see him, she said, her voice trembling. I need to talk to him. Eldred shook his head. It's too dangerous, Lady Catherine. Beaumont's men are everywhere. If they see you with Tristan, they will know he is a traitor. But I can't just leave him, Catherine protested. Not after what you've told me. Eldred placed a hand on her arm. I understand, Lady Catherine. But you must be patient. Tristan has a plan. He will contact you when it is safe. But when? Catherine asked, her voice filled with desperation. How long must I wait? Eldred looked up at the sky, at the cloak of stars that stretched above them, a silent witness to their clandestine meeting. The time will come, Lady Catherine, he said softly. But until then, you must be strong. You must be careful. And you must trust in Tristan. He is risking everything for you. He paused, then looked back at her, his expression serious. And I must go before I am discovered. Know this, Lady Catherine Beaumont is more dangerous than you realize. He seeks not just Dunmere, but the entire kingdom. And he will stop at nothing to achieve his goals. With those parting words, Lord Eldred melted back into the shadows, leaving Catherine alone beneath the vast, starlit sky, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. The truth, once a distant, elusive dream, was now within her grasp, but it was a truth more complex, more dangerous, than she could ever have imagined. And Tristan, the man she had loved and lost, was now a beacon of hope, a knight fighting in the shadows, risking everything for her, for their future. The roar of the falls seemed to echo the turmoil in her heart, a symphony of fear, hope, and a love rekindled beneath a cloak of stars. Chapter 7. Scars of the Past. The journey back to Dunmere was a blur. Catherine's mind raced, replaying Eldred's words, trying to reconcile the image of Tristan the traitor with the reality of Tristan the protector. The weight of his sacrifice, the depth of his deception, was almost too much to bear. She had misjudged him so completely, had condemned him in her heart, while all along he had been risking his life to protect her. As she rode, she began to recall moments, subtle gestures, glances, words spoken in passing, that took on a new meaning in the light of Eldred's revelations. The way Tristan had always positioned himself between her and Beaumont, the subtle warnings he had given her about trusting no one, the way his eyes had lingered on her, filled with a sadness she had not understood. It all made sense now. He had been playing a role, a dangerous, intricate dance of deception, all for her. She arrived back at the castle just before dawn, exhausted but exhilarated. She slipped back into her chambers unnoticed, thanks to Gareth's silent complicity. Alara, who had been pacing anxiously by the window, rushed to greet her, her face etched with relief. "My lady, you are safe," she exclaimed, embracing Catherine tightly.
I was so worried.
Catherine recounted her meeting with Eldred, her voice trembling with emotion. Alara listened in stunned silence, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir Tristan a hero?" she whispered, shaking her head. "I never would have believed it." "Nor I," Catherine admitted. "But it is true, Alara. He has been protecting me all along." The days that followed were filled with a new sense of purpose. Catherine knew she couldn't reveal her knowledge to anyone, not even to Gareth. She had to play her part, to continue to appear as the grieving, defeated daughter of Lord Edmund, while secretly planning her next move. She began to observe Beaumont more closely, studying his every move, his every interaction. She noticed the subtle signs of his ambition, the way he manipulated those around him, the way he tightened his grip on Dunmere, consolidating his power. She also noticed his growing impatience, his frustration at his inability to completely break her spirit. One afternoon, as she was walking in the castle gardens, she encountered Isolde. Beaumont's wife was tending to the roses, her movements graceful and deliberate. Catherine approached her cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Lady Isolde," she said, her voice tentative. Isolde looked up, her blue eyes piercing. "Lady Catherine," she replied, her voice neutral. Catherine hesitated, then decided to take a risk. "I have been thinking about what you said," she said, her voice low. "About trusting no one." Isolde's gaze sharpened.
And
I believe you were right," Catherine said. "I have been naive. I have trusted the wrong people." Isolde studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "It is a dangerous game you are playing, Lady Catherine," she said finally. "I know," Catherine replied. "But I have no choice. I must find out the truth." Isolde nodded slowly. "The truth is a dangerous weapon," she said. "It can cut both ways." "I am willing to take that risk," Catherine said, her voice firm. Isolde turned back to the roses, her fingers gently caressing a velvety petal. "There are scars, Lady Catherine," she said softly, "that never heal. Scars of the past that haunt us, shape us, drive us to do things we never thought possible." Catherine's heart quickened. Was Isolde speaking of her own past? Of her own secrets? "I understand," Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. Isolde looked up at her, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes.
"Do you?" she asked.
"I wonder." She paused, then continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Beaumont is planning a feast," she said. "A grand celebration to mark his victory. He will invite all the neighboring lords, including Eldred." Catherine's mind raced. A feast? With Eldred present? This could be an opportunity or a trap. "Be careful, Lady Catherine," Isolde warned. "Beaumont is watching you. He suspects something." "Thank you, Lady Isolde," Catherine said, her voice filled with gratitude. "For your warning." Isolde nodded, a subtle acknowledgement of their unspoken alliance. As Catherine walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Isolde, too, carried scars of the past, secrets that bound her to this dangerous game, a game where the lines between loyalty and betrayal were blurred, and where the truth was a weapon that could either save or destroy them all. The upcoming feast loomed, a stage set for revelations and reckonings. Chapter 8. The Price of Honor. The preparations for the feast consumed the castle. Servants scurried through the halls, carrying platters of food, barrels of wine, and bolts of richly colored fabric. The great hall was transformed, decorated with banners bearing Beaumont's crest, a snarling wolf's head, a constant reminder of his ruthless ambition. Catherine watched the preparations with a mixture of dread and anticipation. She knew that the feast was more than just a celebration, it was a display of power, a warning to any who might dare to oppose Beaumont. She had managed to send a secret message to Tristan through a trusted intermediary, one of the stable boys who had shown loyalty to her father. She had informed him of Eldred's presence at the feast, and of her growing suspicion that Beaumont was planning something significant. She had received no reply, but she clung to the hope that Tristan would find a way to contact her, to guide her through this treacherous maze. As the day of the feast approached, Catherine found herself increasingly drawn to Gareth, the captain of the guard. She had noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, a growing unease in his eyes whenever he looked at Beaumont. She sensed that he was wrestling with his conscience, torn between his duty to his lord and his loyalty to the memory of her father. One evening, as she was walking along the castle walls, she encountered Gareth standing alone, gazing out at the darkening landscape. She approached him cautiously. "Gareth," she said softly. He turned, startled by her presence. "My lady," he replied, his voice guarded. "May I speak with you?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "As you wish." They walked in silence for a few moments, the only sound the wind whistling through the battlements. "You served my father for many years," Catherine said finally, her voice low. Gareth nodded. I did. He was a good man. A just man. And you believe he was murdered? Catherine asked, her voice trembling. Gareth's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I saw things, my lady, he said quietly. Things I cannot explain. Things that troubled me greatly. Tell me, Catherine urged. Please, Gareth. I need to know the truth. Gareth hesitated, then took a deep breath. The night before the battle, he said, his voice barely a whisper, I overheard a conversation between Lord Beaumont and another man. They were speaking of a plan to betray your father. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest. Who was the other man? She asked, her voice urgent. Gareth looked away, his face etched with shame. I could not see his face. He was cloaked, hooded. But I heard his voice. It was familiar. Familiar? Catherine pressed. Could it have been Sir Tristan? Gareth shook his head. No, my lady. It was not Sir Tristan. His voice, it was deeper, harsher. I cannot be sure, but I believe it was someone close to Lord Beaumont. Someone he trusted implicitly. Catherine's mind raced. Someone close to Beaumont? Who could it be? Could it be Sir Kelrick, his ruthless lieutenant? Or someone else, someone she had not even considered? Gareth, she said, her voice pleading, you must help me. You must help me uncover the truth. Gareth looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. I will, my lady, he said quietly. I swear it. I owe it to your father. And I owe it to my own conscience. He paused, then continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Be careful at the feast, my lady. Beaumont is planning something. I do not know what it is, but I sense danger. Thank you, Gareth, Catherine said, her voice filled with gratitude. For your honesty. And for your loyalty. As she returned to her chamber that night to prepare and dress, her mind was buzzing with the new pieces of the puzzle. The price of honor seemed steep, and many were unwilling to pay. But in Gareth, she saw a flicker of the old ways, and it lit her path toward the coming feast. A feast where truth, as dangerous as it was, had to be unveiled. Chapter 9. A Dance of Deceit. The great hall glittered with candlelight, the air thick with the scent of roasted meats, spices, and the nervous energy of the assembled guests. Nobles from across the land had gathered, their faces a mixture of forced joviality and veiled suspicion. Beaumont, resplendent in a crimson doublet embroidered with gold thread, sat at the high table, his eyes scanning the crowd, assessing, calculating. Isolde, by his side, was a vision of icy beauty in a gown of deep blue velvet, her expression unreadable. Catherine, wearing a gown of deep green silk, a color that reminded her of the forests surrounding Dunmere, of freedom and resilience, entered the hall on Gareth's arm. She felt a surge of both fear and determination. She knew that tonight could be the turning point, the night when the truth about her father's death might finally be revealed. Or it could be the night she lost everything. She spotted Lord Eldred across the room, his face grim and watchful. He gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret. She also saw Sir Kelrick, Beaumont's lieutenant, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. As she took her seat at a table near the back of the hall, she felt a presence beside her. She turned and found herself face to face with Tristan. Her heart leaped into her throat. He was dressed in simple, dark clothing, the attire of a common knight, not the finery he would have worn as Beaumont's supposed ally. His face was leaner, harder than she remembered, his eyes filled with a mixture of weariness and a fierce intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Tristan, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. He gave her a curt nod, his gaze sweeping the hall, assessing the danger. We cannot speak here, he murmured, his voice barely audible above the din of the feast. Meet me in the gardens after the first course. He moved away as quickly as he had appeared, melting into the crowd before anyone could notice their brief exchange. Catherine's mind raced. He was here, risking everything to be near her, to guide her. The first course was a blur. Catherine barely tasted the food, her senses on high alert, watching Beaumont, watching Eldred, watching for any sign of Tristan. As soon as the plates were cleared, she excused herself, making her way to the gardens, her heart pounding in her chest. The gardens were shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the moon and the flickering torches that lined the castle walls. She found Tristan waiting for her near a fountain, his figure concealed in the shadows. "Catherine," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Thank the gods you are safe." She rushed towards him, her arms reaching out to embrace him, but he stopped her, his hands gently but firmly gripping her arms. "We have little time," he said.
"Beaumont suspects something."
"He is watching everyone, especially you." "I know," Catherine replied, her voice trembling. "Eldred told me everything, Tristan. About your sacrifice. About your plan." His eyes softened, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Then you understand why I had to yes," Catherine interrupted, her voice filled with emotion. "I understand. And I am so grateful." Tears welled up in her eyes, tears she had held back for so long. Tristan reached out, his thumb gently wiping away a tear that traced a path down her cheek. "I would do anything for you, Catherine," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Anything to protect you." "And I would do anything for you," she answered, finally locking eyes with him. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Then he leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a brief, tender kiss, a kiss that spoke of longing, of regret, of a love that had endured despite the deception, the danger, the seemingly insurmountable obstacles. "We must be careful," he said, pulling away, his voice regaining its urgency. "Beaumont is planning to announce something tonight. Something that will change everything." "What is it?" Catherine asked, her heart filled with dread. "I believe he intends to declare himself king," Tristan replied, his voice grim. "He has been forging alliances, bribing lords, gathering support. He believes he is ready to make his move." Catherine's blood ran cold. Beaumont king? It was unthinkable. "We must stop him," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We must expose his treachery." "We will," Tristan said, his voice firm. "But we need proof. Concrete evidence that will sway the other lords to our side. Eldred has some information, as he told me some may be a witness." Catherine added. Tristan nodded. "I know. And I have been gathering my own evidence. But we need something definitive. Something that cannot be refuted." He looked deep into her eyes and, cupping her face, told her, "Tonight, every lie will be a dance, and every truth, a carefully concealed weapon. We must be ready." The dance of deceit had begun, and Catherine knew that the steps she took tonight, guided by Tristan, would determine not only her fate, but the fate of the kingdom. Chapter 10. The Lion's Roar. Returning to the great hall, Catherine felt a knot of tension tighten in her stomach. The brief, stolen moment with Tristan had fortified her resolve, but the weight of the impending confrontation with Beaumont pressed down on her. The hall was now even more crowded, the atmosphere buzzing with anticipation. As she took her seat, she saw that Beaumont was preparing to speak. He rose from his chair, a goblet of wine in his hand, his eyes sweeping the assembled guests. The room fell silent, all eyes on the man who held their fate in his hands. "My lords, my ladies," Beaumont began, his voice booming across the hall, "we have gathered here tonight to celebrate a new era. An era of strength, of prosperity, of unity." He paused, letting his words sink in. Catherine exchanged a quick glance with Eldred, who sat across the room, his face a mask of grim determination. "For too long," Beaumont continued, "this kingdom has been weakened by division, by petty squabbles, by weak leadership. King Alaric, may the gods rest his soul, was a good man, but he was not strong enough. He allowed our enemies to grow bolder, our borders to become vulnerable." Catherine's hands clenched into fists at her sides. Beaumont was twisting the truth, manipulating the narrative to suit his own ambitions. "But I say to you," Beaumont roared, his voice rising in intensity, "enough is enough. The time has come for a new leader. A leader who will unite this kingdom, who will crush our enemies, who will restore us to our former glory." He raised his goblet high. I offer you myself as your rightful king. A stunned silence filled the hall. The audacity of Beaumont's declaration was breathtaking. Some of the lords, those who had already sworn fealty to him, began to applaud, their cheers echoing through the room. But others, including Eldred and several other powerful nobles, remained silent, their faces etched with disapproval. Catherine knew this was the moment. She couldn't let Beaumont's lies go unchallenged. She rose from her chair, her heart pounding in her chest, her voice ringing out across the hall. "You are no king," she declared, her voice trembling but firm. "You are a usurper, a murderer, a traitor." All eyes turned to her, the silence now absolute. Beaumont's face darkened with rage, his eyes burning with fury. "You dare to speak to me like that, Lady Catherine?" he snarled. "You, a mere woman, a grieving daughter, with no power, no authority?" "I may be a woman," Catherine retorted, "but I am the daughter of Lord Edmund of Dunmere, a man you betrayed and murdered. And I will not stand by and watch you steal his legacy, his lands, and now the crown." Beaumont laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "You have no proof of these accusations, Lady Catherine. Only the ravings of a madman and the whispers of disgruntled servants." "I have more than whispers," Catherine countered. "I have the truth. And I have allies." She turned to Eldred. "Lord Eldred," she said, her voice clear and strong, "tell them what you know. Tell them what you saw." Eldred rose from his chair, his gaze meeting Beaumont's with unwavering defiance. "I saw you, Beaumont," he said, his voice booming across the hall. "I saw you plotting with the northern rebels. I saw you planning to betray Lord Edmund, to join forces with our enemies." Beaumont scoffed. "Lies. All lies. Eldred is a bitter old man, consumed by jealousy and spite." "And what of Sir Tristan?" Catherine challenged. "The man you framed for my father's murder? The man who has been secretly working against you, gathering evidence of your treachery?" Beaumont's eyes flickered with fear. For the first time, Catherine saw a crack in his armor, a hint of vulnerability. "Sir Tristan is a loyal knight," Beaumont insisted, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "He would never betray me." At that moment, Tristan stepped forward from the shadows, his sword drawn, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. "You are wrong, Beaumont," he said, his voice ringing out across the hall. "I have betrayed you, because my true loyalty lies with the rightful heir of Dunmere and with the memory of the man you murdered." A gasp went up from the assembled guests. The tension in the hall was palpable, the air thick with the threat of violence. Beaumont's men-at-arms, led by Sir Kelric, moved to surround Tristan, their swords drawn.
"Seize him!"
Beaumont roared.
"Kill him!"
But before they could reach him, Gareth, the captain of the guard, stepped forward, his own sword drawn, placing himself between Tristan and Beaumont's men. "No," Gareth said, his voice firm. "I will not allow this. I served Lord Edmund loyally, and I will not stand by and watch his murderer go unpunished." Several other guards, those who had remained loyal to Catherine's father, followed Gareth's lead, forming a protective circle around Tristan and Catherine. The hall was now divided, the lines drawn between those who supported Beaumont and those who stood for truth and justice. The lion's roar of Beaumont's ambition had been met with the defiant roar of those who refused to be silenced. A battle was brewing, a battle not just for the crown, but for the very soul of the kingdom. Chapter 11. Where Shadows Lie. The standoff in the great hall was a tableau of barely contained violence. Swords drawn, loyalties divided, the air crackled with the unspoken threat of bloodshed. Catherine stood beside Tristan, her hand resting on the hilt of the dagger she had concealed beneath her gown, her eyes fixed on Beaumont. Beaumont's face was a mask of fury, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You are all fools," he roared. "You dare to defy me? I am your rightful king. I will crush you all." "You are no king," Tristan retorted, his voice calm but firm. "You are a tyrant, a murderer, a usurper. And your reign of terror ends tonight." "We shall see about that," Beaumont snarled. He turned to Sir Kelric. "Kill them all," he commanded. Leave no one alive. Kelric and his men advanced, their swords raised, ready to strike. But Gareth and the loyal guards stood their ground, forming a shield wall around Tristan and Catherine. For Dunmere, Gareth cried, his voice ringing out across the hall. For justice. For the rightful heir. The clash of steel echoed through the hall as the two sides met. The fighting was fierce, brutal, a desperate struggle for survival. Catherine, though untrained in combat, drew her dagger, ready to defend herself and Tristan. She saw Eldred engaged in a fierce duel with one of Beaumont's men, his aged body surprisingly agile, his movements precise and deadly. She saw Isolde, standing near the high table, her face pale but resolute, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for something.
Or someone.
Tristan fought with the skill and ferocity of a seasoned warrior, his sword a blur of motion, deflecting blows, parrying attacks, protecting Catherine at every turn. He moved with a grace and power that she had never seen before, his every movement a testament to his years of training, his unwavering dedication to his craft. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes never leaving his opponent's. Catherine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She trusted Tristan with her life, knew that he would do everything in his power to protect her. The battle raged on, the outcome uncertain. The loyal guards, though outnumbered, fought with the courage and determination of men who believed in their cause. But Beaumont's men were well-trained and ruthless, and they slowly began to gain the upper hand. Suddenly, Catherine saw Kelric break through the line of defense, his sword aimed straight at Tristan's back. She cried out a warning, but it was too late. Kelric's sword plunged towards Tristan, and Catherine knew, with a sickening certainty, that he wouldn't be able to defend himself in time. But then, a figure stepped in front of Tristan, intercepting Kelric's blow. It was Isolde. The sword pierced Isolde's shoulder, and she cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground. Beaumont screamed her name, a sound of pure anguish, and for a moment, the fighting stopped. Everyone stared in stunned silence at the scene before them. Isolde lay on the floor, her blood staining her blue velvet gown, her face contorted in pain. Beaumont rushed to her side, his eyes filled with tears, his voice choked with emotion. "Isolde, my love, what have you done?" Isolde looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else. Was it regret? Or was it triumph? I had to," she whispered, her voice weak. "I had to stop you." Beaumont stared at her, his mind struggling to comprehend her words. "Stop me?" he repeated.
"But why?"
Isolde reached out, her trembling hand touching his cheek. "You were lost," she said softly.
"Consumed by ambition."
"You were not the man I married." She coughed, a bloody froth appearing on her lips. I loved you," she whispered. "But I could not let you destroy everything." Her hand fell limp, her eyes closing. Beaumont cradled her body in his arms, his sobs echoing through the silent hall. The shadows in the hall seemed to deepen, to gather around Beaumont, a physical manifestation of his grief, his loss, his utter defeat. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted, had betrayed him, had sacrificed herself to stop him. And in that moment, his ambition, his power, his carefully constructed world, crumbled around him. Where the shadows lay, truth had emerged, brutal and unforgiving. Chapter 12. The Broken Vow. The death of Isolde shattered the fragile truce that had descended upon the great hall. Beaumont's grief quickly turned to rage, a blind, unreasoning fury that consumed him. He rose from the floor, his eyes wild, his face contorted with hatred.
"You!"
he roared, pointing at Tristan. "You did this. You turned her against me. You will pay for this with your life." He lunged at Tristan, his sword raised, his movements fueled by a desperate, suicidal energy. Tristan, though still reeling from Isolde's sacrifice, met Beaumont's attack, his own grief and anger fueling his defense. The duel between Tristan and Beaumont was a clash of titans, a battle of wills as much as a battle of swords. They fought with a ferocity that stunned the onlookers, their blades flashing in the candlelight, the clang of steel echoing through the hall. Catherine watched, her heart in her throat, her every nerve on edge. She knew that this was the final confrontation, the culmination of all the lies, the betrayals, the hidden agendas. The fate of Dunmere, the fate of the kingdom, hung in the balance. Tristan, though skilled and determined, was weakened by his earlier wounds, and Beaumont's rage gave him a temporary advantage. He pressed his attack relentlessly, forcing Tristan to backpedal, to defend himself with every ounce of his strength. Catherine saw an opening, a chance to intervene. She moved forward, her dagger drawn, ready to strike at Beaumont, to distract him, to give Tristan a chance to recover. But before she could reach him, Gareth stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "No, my lady," he said, his voice firm. "This is not your fight. Let Tristan handle this. He is the only one who can." Catherine hesitated, torn between her desire to help Tristan and her trust in Gareth's judgment. She knew that he was right. This was Tristan's battle, his chance to redeem himself, to avenge her father, to finally break the vow that had bound him to Beaumont. She stepped back, her eyes fixed on the duel, her heart pounding in her chest. Tristan and Beaumont were locked in a deadly embrace, their swords intertwined, their faces inches apart, their eyes locked in a fierce, unwavering gaze. "You are my friend," Tristan said, his voice low and strained. "I trusted you. I swore an oath to you, and you broke that oath." Beaumont snarled. "You betrayed me." "I swore an oath to protect my lord," Tristan countered. "And you betrayed him. You murdered Lord Edmund. You stole his lands. You sought to usurp the throne. My oath was to a just and honorable man, not to a tyrant and a murderer." He pushed Beaumont back, breaking the deadlock, his sword flashing in the air. He disarmed Beaumont with a swift, precise movement, sending his sword clattering to the floor. Beaumont stood there, unarmed, defeated, his chest heaving, his eyes filled with a mixture of rage and despair. Tristan stood over him, his sword pointed at Beaumont's throat, his face a mask of grim determination. "It is over, Beaumont," Tristan said, his voice cold and steady. "Your reign of terror ends now." For a moment, the hall was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the two men. Catherine held her breath, waiting, anticipating the final blow. But Tristan did not strike. He lowered his sword, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "I will not kill you, Beaumont," he said. "I will not become like you. You will face justice, but it will be the justice of the king's court, not the vengeance of a single man." He turned to Gareth.
"Take him," he said.
"Imprison him. He will answer for his crimes." Gareth and the loyal guards moved forward, seizing Beaumont, binding his hands. Beaumont did not resist. He stood there, his head bowed, his spirit broken, his ambition shattered. As Beaumont was led away, Tristan turned to Catherine, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. "It is over," he said softly. "It is finally over." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. She leaned into his touch, her body trembling with relief. The broken vow, the vow that had defined Tristan's life for so long, had finally been redeemed. He had chosen honor over obedience, justice over loyalty, and in doing so, he had saved not only her, but the entire kingdom. Chapter 13. A Tapestry of Lies. The days following Beaumont's capture were a whirlwind of activity. Messengers were dispatched to the royal court, informing King Alaric's successor, his young nephew, Edward, of Beaumont's treachery and his subsequent imprisonment. A temporary council was formed, consisting of Eldred, Gareth, Catherine, and Tristan, to govern Dunmere until the king's representatives arrived. Catherine, though still reeling from the events of the feast, found herself thrust into a position of leadership. She had never sought power, had never desired to rule, but she knew that she had a duty to her people, to ensure that Dunmere was restored to its former peace and prosperity. Tristan, cleared of all suspicion, was hailed as a hero, his bravery and loyalty lauded throughout the land. He took on the role of commander of the guard, working tirelessly to rebuild Dunmere's defenses and ensure the safety of its people. But despite the outward appearance of order and stability, Catherine felt a lingering unease. There were still unanswered questions, loose ends that needed to be tied up. Isolde's sacrifice, her cryptic words to Beaumont, haunted her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, another layer of deception that had yet to be uncovered. She spent hours in the library, poring over old records, searching for any clue, any hint of Isolde's motives. She discovered that Isolde had been a distant relative of King Alaric, a member of a minor noble house that had been stripped of its lands and titles many years ago. Could her actions have been motivated by a desire for revenge, a desire to reclaim her family's lost heritage? She also learned that Isolde had been a close friend of Catherine's mother, Lady Eleanor, who had died when Catherine was a young child. They had shared a secret, a bond that had transcended their different social standings. Could that secret have something to do with Isolde's betrayal of Beaumont? One evening, as she was sitting in the library, surrounded by stacks of dusty scrolls, Tristan entered. He found her asleep at the large oak table, her head resting on her arms, a half-written letter lying before her. He gently touched her shoulder, waking her. "Catherine," he said softly, "you need to rest." She looked up at him, her eyes tired but determined. "I can't," she said. "There's something I'm missing. Something about Isolde." Tristan sat down beside her, his gaze filled with concern.
"Isolde is gone," he said.
"Her actions, they were her own. You cannot blame yourself for what happened."
"But why?"
Catherine persisted. "Why did she do it? What was she trying to achieve?" Tristan sighed. "Perhaps she simply wanted to stop Beaumont," he said. "Perhaps she realized the error of her ways, the damage he was doing to the kingdom. But there's more," Catherine insisted. "I can feel it. There's a piece of the puzzle that's missing." Tristan looked at the letter she had been writing, a letter addressed to Lord Elric, a distant cousin of Isolde, known for his knowledge of history and genealogy. "What are you hoping to find?" he asked. "Answers," Catherine replied. "I need to understand Isolde's past, her connections, her motives. I need to unravel this tapestry of lies that has been woven around us." Tristan nodded, understanding her need for closure, her desire to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed their lives.
"Then I will help you," he said.
"We will find the answers together." He picked up a quill and began to add to her letter, his handwriting strong and decisive. He suggested specific questions to ask Lord Elric, details about Isolde's family history, her relationships, any possible connections to Beaumont or the northern rebels. As they worked together, their hands occasionally brushing, their eyes meeting, Catherine felt a renewed sense of hope. The tapestry of lies was complex and intricate, but with Tristan by her side, she knew that they would eventually unravel it, thread by thread, until the truth was finally revealed. The truth, she realized, was not always simple, not always clear, but it was always worth fighting for. Chapter 14. The Weight of a Crown. The arrival of the king's representatives brought a sense of formality and order back to Dunmere. The young King Edward, barely a man, sent his most trusted advisor, Lord Ashworth, a seasoned diplomat known for his wisdom and impartiality, to oversee the transition of power and to conduct a thorough investigation into Beaumont's crimes. Catherine, Tristan, Eldred, and Gareth presented their evidence to Lord Ashworth, recounting the events of the past few months, the betrayals, the battles, the sacrifices. Ashworth listened intently, his face impassive, his questions sharp and probing. He interrogated Beaumont, who remained defiant and unrepentant, claiming that he had acted in the best interests of the kingdom, that he had been the only one strong enough to rule. The investigation uncovered a web of deceit that stretched far beyond Dunmere. Beaumont had been in league with several other powerful lords, all of whom had been promised lands and titles in exchange for their support. He had also been receiving funds and supplies from the northern rebels, who saw him as a valuable ally in their quest to overthrow the king. As the truth emerged, Catherine felt a growing sense of responsibility. The weight of a crown, the burden of leadership, pressed down on her. She was the rightful heir of Dunmere, and she knew that she could no longer avoid her destiny. One evening, as she was walking with Tristan in the castle gardens, she confided in him her fears and doubts. "I never wanted this, Tristan," she said, her voice troubled. "I never wanted to be a ruler. I just wanted to be happy." Tristan stopped, turning to face her, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know," he said softly, "but you are strong, Catherine. Stronger than you realize. You have a good heart, a keen mind, and a sense of justice that will guide you well." "But I'm afraid," Catherine admitted. "Afraid of making the wrong decisions, of failing my people." Tristan took her hands in his touch sending a warmth through her.
"You will not be alone," he said.
"I will be by your side always. And you have Eldred, Gareth, and the support of your people."
"They believe in you, Catherine."
"And so do I." His words gave her strength, a renewed sense of purpose. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something more. The love that had blossomed between them, nurtured in the shadows, tested by fire, was now a beacon of hope, a source of strength that would sustain her through the challenges ahead. "Thank you, Tristan," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "For everything." He leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a tender kiss, a promise of a future together, a future where they would rule Dunmere, not with fear and oppression, but with justice and compassion. The following day, Lord Ashworth announced his findings. Beaumont was found guilty of treason, murder, and conspiracy. He was stripped of his titles and lands and sentenced to life imprisonment in the royal dungeons. The other lords who had supported him were also punished, their lands confiscated, their power diminished. Lord Ashworth then turned to Catherine. "Lady Catherine of Dunmere," he said, his voice formal, "you are the rightful heir to your father's lands and titles. The king recognizes your claim and has instructed me to offer you the position of ruling lady of Dunmere." Catherine took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked at Tristan, at Eldred, at Gareth, at the faces of the people gathered in the great hall, their eyes filled with hope and expectation. "I accept," she said, her voice clear and strong. A cheer went up from the crowd, a wave of relief and joy that washed over the hall. Catherine, the grieving daughter, the reluctant heir, had finally embraced her destiny. She would rule Dunmere, not as a queen, but as a lady, a protector of her people, a guardian of justice. The weight of the crown, though heavy, was now a burden she would bear with courage and grace, guided by the love and support of the man who stood beside her, the knight who had been her protector, her confidant, her love. Chapter 15. Beyond Redemption's Gate. The transition to ruling Lady of Dunmere was not easy. Catherine faced numerous challenges, from rebuilding the castle's defenses to restoring the morale of its people. The scars of Beaumont's reign ran deep, and it took time to heal the wounds he had inflicted. Catherine proved to be a wise and compassionate ruler. She listened to her people, addressed their grievances, and worked tirelessly to improve their lives. She established a council of advisors, consisting of Tristan, Eldred, Gareth, and several other trusted individuals, to help her make decisions and govern effectively. Tristan, as commander of the guard, was instrumental in restoring order and security to Dunmere. He trained new recruits, strengthened the castle walls, and established patrols to protect the surrounding lands from bandits and outlaws. He also worked to root out any remaining pockets of support for Beaumont, ensuring that the threat of rebellion was extinguished. One of the most pressing issues Catherine faced was the fate of the prisoners who had been captured during the fighting at the feast. Many of them were simple men-at-arms who had been following Beaumont's orders, unaware of his true intentions. Others were more deeply implicated in his crimes, having actively participated in his plot to overthrow the king. Catherine and her council debated long and hard about how to deal with the prisoners. Some argued for harsh punishments, for executions and imprisonment, to set an example and deter future rebellions. Others advocated for leniency, for forgiveness and rehabilitation, believing that many of the prisoners could be redeemed. Catherine, guided by her own sense of justice and compassion, ultimately decided on a course of action that balanced both punishment and mercy. Those who had committed serious crimes, such as murder and torture, were sentenced to imprisonment. But those who had simply followed orders, who had been misled by Beaumont, were given a chance to redeem themselves. She offered them the opportunity to swear fealty to her, to serve in Dunmere's guard, to prove their loyalty through their actions. Many of the prisoners accepted her offer, grateful for the chance to start anew. They proved to be valuable additions to Dunmere's forces, their skills and experience honed by years of service, now channeled towards a just and honorable cause. One prisoner, however, remained defiant and unrepentant, Sir Kelrick, Beaumont's ruthless lieutenant. He had been responsible for some of the worst atrocities committed during Beaumont's reign, and he showed no remorse for his actions. Catherine visited Kelrick in his cell, a dark, damp chamber deep beneath the castle. He sat on the floor, his hands chained to the wall, his eyes filled with hatred. "You have a chance to redeem yourself, Kelrick," Catherine said, her voice firm but compassionate. "Swear fealty to me, and I will spare your life." Kelrick spat on the floor. "I will never swear fealty to you, you usurping whelp," he snarled. "Beaumont was the rightful ruler, and I will remain loyal to him until my dying breath." Catherine sighed.
"Then you leave me no choice," she said.
"You will be imprisoned for the rest of your days. You will have time to reflect on your crimes, to consider the consequences of your actions." Kelrick laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "You think you have one?"
he said.
"You think you have defeated us? You are wrong. Beaumont may be gone, but his spirit lives on. There are others who will rise up and challenge your rule. You will never be safe." Catherine met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Perhaps," she said, "but I will not be intimidated. I will rule Dunmere with justice and compassion, and I will defend my people from any who threaten them." She turned and walked away, leaving Kelrick alone in his darkness. As she climbed the stairs, she could hear his laughter echoing behind her, a chilling reminder of the darkness that still lurked beyond redemption's gate. But she knew that she could not let fear dictate her actions. She had a duty to her people, a responsibility to build a better future, a future where justice prevailed and where even the darkest hearts had a chance to find redemption. But some, like Kelrick, were too far gone, lost in their own hatred and ambition. Chapter 16. The Heart's True North. With Beaumont and Kelrick dealt with, Catherine turned her attention to the more personal aspects of her new life. She had received a reply from Lord Elric, Isolde's distant cousin, and the information he provided shed new light on Isolde's past, her motivations, and her complex relationship with Beaumont. Elric revealed that Isolde had been secretly in love with Beaumont for many years, long before he had married her. She had been a pawn in her family's ambitious schemes, used to forge an alliance with Beaumont, who at the time was a rising star in the royal court. But Isolde's love for Beaumont had been genuine, a deep and abiding passion that had consumed her. However, Elric also revealed that Isolde had been deeply troubled by Beaumont's growing ruthlessness and ambition. She had witnessed his cruelty firsthand, had seen the way he manipulated and betrayed those around him, including her own family. She had tried to reason with him, to persuade him to change his course, but he had ignored her pleas. Isolde's friendship with Catherine's mother, Lady Eleanor, had been a source of solace and strength. Eleanor had known about Isolde's love for Beaumont, and she had also been aware of his dark side. She had warned Isolde about the dangers of his ambition, had urged her to distance herself from him. The secret they shared, Elric revealed, was a pact they had made, a vow to protect each other and their families from Beaumont's treachery. Eleanor had foreseen the danger he posed, and she had made Isolde promise to do whatever was necessary to stop him, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness. Catherine realized, with a pang of sadness, that Isolde's sacrifice at the feast had been the fulfillment of that vow. She had acted not out of revenge or ambition, but out of love, a twisted, desperate love for Beaumont that had ultimately led her to betray him in order to save him from himself and to protect the kingdom from his tyranny. The revelation brought a sense of closure to Catherine, a deeper understanding of Isolde's complex character and the tragic circumstances that had shaped her life. She arranged for Isolde's body to be buried with honor in the castle chapel, a tribute to her courage and her sacrifice. With the past finally put to rest, Catherine could focus on the future, on her relationship with Tristan. Their love had blossomed in the midst of chaos and danger, and now, with peace restored to Dunmere, they could finally explore the depths of their feelings, the possibilities that lay before them. One evening, as they were walking together in the gardens, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun, Tristan turned to Catherine, his eyes filled with a love that made her heart ache with happiness. "Catherine," he said, his voice low and tender, "I have loved you for so long, from the moment I first saw you, tending to the roses in this very garden." Catherine smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "And I have loved you, Tristan," she said, "even when I believed you to be my enemy." He took her hands in his touch sending a warmth through her. "Will you marry me, Catherine?" he asked, his voice filled with hope and a hint of uncertainty. "Will you be my wife, my partner, my queen?" Catherine's heart overflowed with joy. "Yes, Tristan," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I will be your wife, your partner, your everything." He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sealed their vows, a kiss that spoke of a love that had endured, a love that would guide them, a love that was their true north, their compass in a world that had been filled with darkness and deceit. They would rule Dunmere together, not as king and queen, but as lord and lady, bound by love, by duty, by a shared vision of a better future. Chapter 17. Whispers of Rebellion. The announcement of Catherine and Tristan's betrothal was met with a widespread celebration throughout Dunmere. The people rejoiced, seeing in their union a symbol of hope, a promise of a brighter future. Preparations for the wedding began immediately, the castle buzzing with activity, the air filled with excitement and anticipation. But even as Dunmere celebrated, whispers of rebellion began to surface. Kelrick's words, his chilling prophecy of continued resistance, echoed in Catherine's mind. She knew that Beaumont's influence, though diminished, was not entirely extinguished. There were still those who remained loyal to him, who plotted in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Tristan, ever vigilant, intensified his patrols, strengthening the castle's defenses and working to identify and apprehend any potential threats. He uncovered several small, isolated groups of Beaumont loyalists, mostly disgruntled former soldiers and minor nobles who had lost their lands and titles. These groups were quickly dealt with, their leaders imprisoned or exiled. But one group proved to be more elusive, more dangerous. They called themselves the Wolf's Pack, a reference to Beaumont's crest, and they were led by a shadowy figure known only as the Shadow Wolf. They operated in secret, their identities unknown, their methods ruthless and efficient. They began a campaign of terror, attacking outlying villages, ambushing patrols, and spreading rumors and propaganda designed to undermine Catherine's authority and incite rebellion. They left behind their mark, a wolf's head carved into trees or painted on walls, a chilling reminder of their presence and their power. Catherine and Tristan knew that they had to find and stop the Shadow Wolf before his influence spread, before his campaign of terror escalated into a full-blown rebellion. They intensified their efforts, questioning informants, interrogating prisoners, and searching for any clue that might lead them to the Wolf's Pack's hidden base of operations. One evening, as they were reviewing reports in the war room, Gareth entered, his face grim. "My lady, Sir Tristan," he said, "we have captured a prisoner who claims to have information about the Shadow Wolf." The prisoner was a young man, barely more than a boy, his clothes torn and dirty, his face bruised and bloodied. He was brought before Catherine and Tristan, his eyes filled with fear. "Speak," Catherine commanded, her voice firm. "Tell us what you know." The young man hesitated, his gaze darting between Catherine and Tristan. I was a member of the Wolf's Pack," he said, his voice trembling. I know where their hideout is." "Where?" Tristan asked, his voice sharp. "In the Whispering Woods," the young man replied. "Near the old ruins, the ruins of Blackwood Manor." Blackwood Manor. The name sent a shiver down Catherine's spine. It was an ancient, abandoned estate, rumored to be haunted, a place of darkness and despair. It had been the seat of a powerful, ruthless family that had been wiped out centuries ago, their name erased from history. Why would they choose such a place? Catherine asked. Because it is hidden, the young man replied. And because it is said to be cursed. No one dares to go there. We will go there, Tristan said, his voice determined. We will find the shadow wolf and put an end to his terror. Catherine nodded. Prepare a company of men, she said to Gareth. We ride at dawn. The whispers of rebellion had led them to a place of shadows, a place of forgotten history. Catherine knew that the confrontation with the shadow wolf would be dangerous, that it could cost them dearly. But she also knew that she could not allow fear to paralyze her. She had a duty to her people, a responsibility to protect them from the darkness that threatened to engulf them. And she would face that darkness, side by side with the man she loved, the knight who had sworn to protect her, no matter the cost. Chapter 18. The Sword's Edge. The journey to Blackwood Manor was fraught with peril. The Whispering Woods lived up to their name, the wind rustling through the ancient trees, creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere. The path was treacherous, overgrown with thorns and tangled roots, and the air was thick with a scent of decay and damp earth. Catherine rode beside Tristan, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword, her senses on high alert. Gareth and a company of 20 hand-picked soldiers followed close behind, their faces grim, their weapons ready. As they neared the ruins of Blackwood Manor, the forest grew even darker, the trees taller and more imposing, their branches intertwined, blocking out the sunlight. A sense of dread descended upon them, a feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen eyes. The ruins themselves were a chilling sight. The once grand manor was now a crumbling shell, its walls covered in ivy, its windows dark and empty, its roof partially collapsed. It stood on a small rise, overlooking a desolate, overgrown courtyard, a monument to a forgotten past, a testament to the destructive power of time and decay. This is it, Tristan said, his voice low. The shadow wolf's lair. He dismounted, drawing his sword, his eyes scanning the ruins, searching for any sign of movement. Catherine and the others followed suit, forming a defensive circle, their weapons drawn. Spread out, Tristan commanded. Search the ruins. But be careful. They could be anywhere. The soldiers moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing through the silent ruins. Catherine and Tristan moved together, their backs to each other, their senses straining to detect any hint of danger. They searched the courtyard, the stables, the few remaining outbuildings, but found no sign of the wolf's pack. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of the wind and the occasional caw of a raven. They must be inside the manor itself, Catherine said, her voice barely a whisper. Tristan nodded. Let's go. They approached the main entrance, a massive oak door, its wood rotted and cracked, its iron hinges rusted and broken. Tristan pushed the door open with a creak, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway, its walls lined with cobwebs, its floor covered in dust and debris. As they stepped inside, they heard a sound, a faint scraping noise, coming from somewhere deep within the manor. They moved forward, their swords raised, their hearts pounding in their chests. They passed through several rooms, each one more dilapidated than the last, their walls crumbling, their floors littered with broken furniture and shattered glass. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay, and a sense of oppressive darkness hung over them. Suddenly, they heard a voice, a cold, menacing voice that echoed through the hallway. Welcome, Lady Catherine, the voice said. Welcome, Sir Tristan. I have been expecting you. They stopped, their eyes searching the shadows, trying to locate the source of the voice. A figure stepped out of the darkness, his face hidden beneath the hood of a dark cloak. He was tall and slender, his movements graceful and deliberate. He held a sword in his hand, its blade gleaming in the dim light. Who are you? Catherine demanded, her voice firm. The figure chuckled, a chilling, mirthless sound. I am the Shadow Wolf, he said. And you have walked into my trap. He raised his hand, and from the shadows, dozens of figures emerged, armed with swords, axes, and bows. They were the wolf's pack, and they had surrounded Catherine and Tristan. "Kill them," the shadow wolf commanded. The battle began. The clash of steel echoed through the ruins, the air filled with the sounds of fighting, the cries of men, the thud of falling bodies. Catherine and Tristan fought back to back, their swords a blur of motion, deflecting blows, parrying attacks, protecting each other at every turn. They were skilled warriors, but they were outnumbered, surrounded by enemies who were determined to kill them. Catherine fought with a ferocity she had never known before, fueled by her love for Tristan, her determination to protect her people, her hatred for the darkness that the shadow wolf represented. She cut down one opponent, then another, her sword dripping with blood. Tristan, too, fought with incredible skill and courage, his movements precise and deadly. He was a whirlwind of steel, a force of nature, protecting Catherine, clearing a path through the enemy ranks. But even as they fought, they knew that they were losing. The wolf's pack was too numerous, too determined. They were slowly being overwhelmed, their strength waning, their defenses weakening. The sword's edge, once sharp and promising, was now dull with exhaustion and the grim reality of their situation. Chapter 19. A Dawn of Reckoning. As the battle raged within the crumbling walls of Blackwood Manor, Catherine found herself separated from Tristan. She was surrounded by a group of wolf's pack members, their faces grim, their eyes filled with hatred. She fought with the courage of desperation, her sword a blur of motion, but she knew she couldn't hold them off for long. One of the attackers, a burly man with a scarred face, lunged at her, his axe raised high. Catherine parried the blow, but the force of the impact sent her stumbling backward. She tripped over a piece of fallen masonry, losing her balance, falling to the ground. The scarred man stood over her, his axe poised to strike the killing blow. Catherine closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. She heard a roar of rage, a clash of steel, and then a sickening thud. She opened her eyes and saw Tristan standing over her, his sword dripping with blood, the scarred man lying dead at his feet. "Are you all right?" Tristan asked, his voice filled with concern, his eyes searching hers for any sign of injury. Catherine nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Thank you." Tristan helped her to her feet, his hand gripping hers tightly. "We need to get out of here," he said. "We can't win this fight." He looked around, assessing the situation. They were surrounded, outnumbered, their escape seemingly impossible. But then, he saw it a narrow passage, partially hidden behind a collapsed section of wall, leading deeper into the manor. "This way," he said, pulling her towards the passage.
Quickly.
They squeezed through the narrow opening, finding themselves in a dark, dusty corridor. They ran, their footsteps echoing through the silence, hoping to find a way out of the ruins, a way to escape the clutches of the wolf's pack. As they ran, they heard the sounds of pursuit, the shouts of the wolf's pack members, the clang of their weapons. They knew they couldn't outrun them, that they would eventually be caught. They came to a large, circular room, its walls lined with bookshelves, its floor covered in a thick layer of dust. It was the manor's library, a place of forgotten knowledge, a silent witness to centuries of history. "We can't go any further," Catherine said, her voice breathless. "We're trapped." Tristan looked around, his eyes searching for any possible escape route, any weapon, any advantage. He saw a large, heavy tapestry hanging on one of the walls, depicting a scene of a hunting party in a forest. "Help me," he said, grabbing one end of the tapestry. Together, they pulled the tapestry down, revealing a hidden door behind it. The door was made of thick oak, reinforced with iron bands, its surface covered in intricate carvings. "A secret passage," Catherine said, her heart filled with a flicker of hope. Tristan tried the door handle, but it was locked. He drew his sword, attempting to force the lock, but it wouldn't budge. "It's no use," he said, his voice frustrated. "It's too strong." Catherine examined the door more closely, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. She noticed a small, almost imperceptible button, hidden within the design.
"Wait," she said. "I think I see something."
She pressed the button, and with a click, the door unlocked. They pushed it open, revealing a narrow, winding staircase leading down into darkness. "Let's go," Tristan said, his voice urgent. They descended the stairs, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The air grew colder, damper, and the darkness deepened. They had no idea where the passage led, but they knew it was their only chance of escape. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a long, underground tunnel. The tunnel was dimly lit by torches placed at intervals along the walls, casting flickering shadows that danced and swayed. They moved forward cautiously, their swords drawn, their senses on high alert. They had escaped the wolf's pack for now, but they knew they were not yet safe. They were still trapped within the ruins of Blackwood Manor, and the shadow wolf was still out there, waiting for them. The dawn of reckoning was approaching, but it was unclear who would emerge victorious from the shadows. Chapter 20. The Queen's Gambit. The underground tunnel stretched before Catherine and Tristan, a labyrinth of damp stone and flickering shadows. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence, their swords held ready. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something metallic, like old blood. As they rounded a corner, they saw a light ahead, a faint glow emanating from a chamber at the end of the tunnel. They approached slowly, their senses on high alert. The chamber was large and circular, its walls lined with rough-hewn stone. In the center of the room was a stone altar, stained with dark, ancient stains. The air was heavy with a sense of evil, a palpable darkness that made Catherine's skin crawl. And standing before the altar, his back to them, was the shadow wolf. He was still cloaked, his face hidden, but Catherine could sense his power, his cold, ruthless determination. He was holding something in his hands, something that gleamed in the dim light. It was a dagger, its blade long and curved, its hilt encrusted with jewels. "You should not have come here," the shadow wolf said, his voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. "This is a place of death, a place of sacrifice." He turned, slowly, revealing his face. Catherine gasped. It was Sir Kelric. His face was even more scarred than she remembered, his eyes filled with a madness that sent a shiver down her spine. He had escaped from his prison, somehow, and had taken on the mantle of the Shadow Wolf, gathering around him the remnants of Beaumont's loyalists. "Kelric," Catherine said, her voice trembling. "It was you all along." Kelric laughed, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Yes, Lady Catherine," he said. "It was I. I told you, didn't I? I told you that Beaumont's spirit would live on, that you would never be safe." "You will not succeed," Tristan said, his voice firm, his sword raised. "Your reign of terror ends here." Kelric smirked. "You think you can defeat me?" he said. "You are too alone, trapped in my lair. I have the power of the Ancient Ones on my side." He raised the dagger high above his head, chanting in a language Catherine did not understand. The air in the chamber grew colder, the shadows deeper, and a sense of dread filled her heart. "What is he doing?" she whispered to Tristan. "I don't know," Tristan replied, his voice grim. "But it cannot be good." Kelric continued his chanting, his voice growing louder, his eyes blazing with a fanatic light. The dagger in his hand began to glow, emitting a dark, pulsating energy. Catherine realized, with a sudden, terrifying certainty, what Kelric was attempting. He was performing a ritual, a dark magic ritual, designed to summon something. Something evil. "We have to stop him," she said, her voice urgent. Tristan nodded. "Together," he said. They charged at Kelric, their swords raised, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they approached, a force field, invisible but powerful, threw them back, sending them sprawling to the floor. Kelric laughed, his voice filled with triumph. "You cannot touch me," he said. "I am protected by the Ancient Ones." And soon, They will be unleashed upon this land, and your reign will be drowned in blood." Catherine and Tristan struggled to their feet, their bodies aching, their spirits shaken. They knew they had to find a way to break through Kelrick's defenses to stop him before he completed his ritual. Catherine looked around the chamber, her eyes searching for any weakness, any vulnerability. She saw that the walls were lined with ancient symbols, carvings that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight. She recognized some of the symbols from her studies in the library, symbols associated with dark magic, with rituals of sacrifice and summoning. And then she saw it. One symbol, different from the others, a symbol of protection, of warding off evil. It was subtly placed, almost hidden, amongst the darker carvings. "Tristan," she said, her voice urgent. "The symbols on the wall. There's one a symbol of protection. If we can channel its energy." Tristan understood immediately. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers, a silent communication passing between them. They moved together, slowly, cautiously, approaching the wall, avoiding Kelrick's gaze. They reached the symbol of protection, placing their hands upon it, closing their eyes, focusing their minds. They began to chant, softly at first, then louder, their voices blending together, drawing upon the ancient power of the symbol, channeling its energy into themselves. Kelrick, sensing their intent, turned towards them, his eyes filled with rage.
"No,"
he screamed. "You cannot stop me. The ritual is almost complete." But it was too late. The symbol of protection glowed brightly, emitting a wave of pure, white energy that washed over the chamber, shattering Kelrick's force field, disrupting his ritual. Kelrick cried out in pain, the dagger falling from his grasp, the dark energy dissipating into nothingness. He stumbled backward, his power broken, his madness exposed. Tristan charged at him, his sword raised, his face a mask of righteous fury. Kelrick, weakened and disoriented, could not defend himself. Tristan's sword struck true, piercing Kelrick's heart, ending his reign of terror forever. The chamber fell silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of Catherine and Tristan. The darkness receded, the sense of evil lifted, replaced by a feeling of peace. Catherine looked at Tristan, her eyes filled with relief and gratitude. "We did it," she whispered. "We stopped him." Tristan nodded, his face pale but resolute. He sheathed his sword, then reached out, taking Catherine's hand in his. "It is over," he said softly. "The Queen's gambit has succeeded." He was referencing the bold play she had orchestrated, using knowledge and strategy to win instead of brute force. She used her understanding against the very magic that threatened them. They emerged from the ruins of Blackwood Manor into the dawn of a new day, a day of reckoning, a day of hope. The Wolf's Pack was defeated, their leader slain, their threat extinguished. Dunmere was safe, and the kingdom could finally begin to heal. They were met and cheered by the remaining men who had defeated the last members of Kelrick's band outside. Epilogue. The wedding of Catherine and Tristan was a celebration unlike any Dunmere had ever seen. The entire kingdom rejoiced, their hearts filled with hope and gratitude for the brave couple who had saved them from the darkness of Beaumont and Kelrick's tyranny. Catherine, radiant in a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread, walked down the aisle of the castle chapel on the arm of Lord Eldred, who had become a trusted advisor and a father figure to her. Tristan, standing tall and proud at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration, awaited her arrival. The ceremony was simple but profound, their vows spoken with heartfelt sincerity, their love for each other a beacon of hope for the future. As they exchanged rings, a symbol of their eternal bond, a cheer went up from the assembled guests, a wave of joy that echoed through the chapel and beyond. Catherine and Tristan ruled Dunmere wisely and justly, their reign marked by peace, prosperity, and compassion. They rebuilt the castle, strengthened its defenses, and established trade routes that brought wealth and stability to the land. They fostered a sense of community, of unity, encouraging their people to work together, to heal the wounds of the past, and to build a better future. They were blessed with children, a son and a daughter, who inherited their parents' courage, their intelligence, and their compassion. The children grew up in a world free from the shadows of tyranny, a world where justice prevailed and where love and loyalty were valued above all else. Years passed, and Catherine and Tristan grew old together, their love for each other deepening with each passing day. They had faced many challenges, overcome many obstacles, but their bond had remained unbroken, their commitment to each other unwavering. One evening, as they sat together on the castle walls, watching the sun set over the rolling hills of Dunmere, Catherine turned to Tristan, her eyes filled with a love that had endured the test of time. "We did it, Tristan," she said softly. "We built a better world." Tristan smiled, his hand reaching out to gently caress her cheek. "We did it together, my love," he replied. "And that is all that matters." He leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a tender kiss, a kiss that spoke of a lifetime of shared joys and sorrows, of unwavering devotion, of a love that had conquered all. Dunmere, under their rule, had flourished. The echoes of treachery and betrayal had faded, replaced by the harmonious sounds of a thriving kingdom. Their legacy was not one of conquest or power, but of healing, unity, and a love that illuminated even the darkest corners of their realm. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their reign settled into legend, a tale whispered through generations of a knight and his lady, who saved a kingdom and found their forever in each other's arms. The end.